The move was temporary just until my home repairs were finished. I arrived at Kevin and Sienna's house with a single suitcase, trying to minimize my presence. But the moment Kevin opened the door, a furious voice erupted from the kitchen. It was Sienna, completely unaware I was standing there. She shrieked, "Why is that old leech here? We don't have space. Her stuff is cluttering my life, and she needs to stay out of our way." I stood on the doorstep, realizing my short stay was already a hostile invasion. "Hello, I'm Patricia. I'm 70 years old, recently retired after a successful career as an accountant. My professional life was built on independence, clear boundaries, and meticulous organization traits I value deeply and expect in others. Until 2 weeks ago, I lived entirely alone and independently in my own home, which is undergoing extensive, necessary structural repairs, following some unforeseen foundation issues. The required displacement was supposed to be a straightforward 3-week stay with my family. My late husband David passed away 7 years ago. Since then, I've cherished my solitude and highly ordered life. I have one son, Kevin, 42, who works as a logistics manager. Kevin is a generally kind man, but he has always been conflict averse and easily dominated by the stronger personalities around him. He married Sienna 8 years ago. Sienna, 38, is a vibrant, vocal woman, but she is intensely focused on maintaining her own pristine modern lifestyle and views any disruption as a personal affront. I believed my temporary move to Kevin and Sienna's home was a practical arrangement based on necessity and familial obligation. I had taken every measure to minimize my footprint, emphasizing the brevity of my stay. The moment I heard Sienna's unfiltered, vicious outburst, my professional composure shattered. It was the absolute confirmation that my presence was not seen as family, but as a burden, a drain, a leech. This story is about how a temporary inconvenience exposed a permanent hostility. My relentless focus on independence and financial stability stems from my early life, where unexpected poverty taught me the devastating consequences of relying on others. My career as an accountant cemented the belief that order, self-sufficiency, and clear boundaries are the only true sources of security. I am deeply uncomfortable with debt, emotional dependence, or clutter, physical or relational. For me, chaos equals vulnerability. Losing my husband David was emotionally shattering, but I managed my grief by doubling down on my professional competence, ensuring my financial and personal life remained rigidly organized. My house became my sanctuary, the physical manifestation of my control. Being forced out due to the foundation issues felt like a profound loss of control, leaving me feeling exposed and vulnerable for the first time in years. I've always had a tense underlying friction with Sienna. She views my meticulous order as criticism of her own more casual lifestyle, and she sees my financial independence as a source of leverage for her, a potential inheritance she felt entitled to. She was always perfectly civil, however, her compliments often felt backhanded, and her gaze lingered too long on my jewelry or the deed to my home. I'd notice her expression shift when I mentioned my trust structure, a fleeting look of frustration. My own body language around her was always stiff. I often caught myself tapping my fingers nervously when she discussed their lavish spending habits, instinctively sensing a lack of financial discipline. My primary fear, amplified by my current predicament, is being perceived as a burden. My worst nightmare is becoming an aging dependent who must rely on the grudging charity of others. When I arranged this temporary stay, I went out of my way to assure Kevin and Sienna I would pay for utilities, handle my own laundry, and stay out of their way, driven by this overwhelming fear of inconvenience. The insult, the word leech, strikes directly at the core of my identity. It rejects not only my physical presence, but my entire life's work of self-sufficiency. It confirms my deepest anxiety that they don't see their mother or family. They see an imposition, a disruption, and a financial obligation. Hearing that vicious, unedited expression of contempt solidified the terrifying realization that my son's wife views me with utter hostility, exploiting my temporary helplessness to express her true feelings. Before the catastrophic moment at the door, the situation was defined by an awkward, brittle peace, maintained entirely by my strenuous efforts to be invisible. I had meticulously prepared for the move, ensuring I arrived with only one moderate-sized suitcase containing essentials, leaving all my filing boxes and valuables secured off-site. I even scheduled the arrival time precisely when Kevin was due home, hoping to minimize direct, unsupervised interaction with Sienna. My hands were already reaching for my wallet to offer Kevin cash for the first week's groceries and utilities the moment he greeted me. Kevin and Sienna's home is modern, sleek, and minimalist, a stark contrast to my comfortable, slightly cluttered traditional ranch. I knew my mere presence, even confined to the designated small guest room, was a violation of Sienna's pristine aesthetic. The day before, during a brief, strained phone call, Sienna had emphasized the tightness of their space, her voice carrying a definite edge of resentment. I responded with excessive politeness, reiterating, "I will be no trouble at all, Sienna. I brought very little, and I will be out of your hair in 3 weeks exactly." This preemptive communication was driven by my fear of being a burden. The unspoken dynamic in their home was one of control versus compliance. Sienna ruled the household with an iron fist of aesthetic perfection, and Kevin, my son, simply complied to avoid her volatile reactions. I often witnessed Kevin's body language shrinking whenever Sienna raised an eyebrow about a misplaced cushion or a speck of dust. He lived in a state of chronic passivity, prioritizing her comfort above all else. As Kevin opened the door, a faint forced smile on his face, he was clearly bracing for the next 3 weeks of tension. I stood on the doorstep, poised to hand him the envelope of cash, feeling profoundly uncomfortable in the role of the temporary dependent. The sunlight hit the hardwood floors, emphasizing the sterile perfection of their entryway. Then Sienna's shrill, angry voice sliced through the false calm from the kitchen a few feet away. She was talking about me, using me, the person standing right there, as the subject of her unbridled rage, completely unaware I was within earshot. Her choice of the word leech confirmed every suspicion I ever had about her true feelings regarding my independence and her perceived inheritance. The initial plan of a quiet temporary stay was now irrevocably shattered by the shocking, hostile reality of her contempt. The word leech hung in the air, a vile, poisonous sound that froze me instantly on the doorstep. Kevin, already turning to grab my suitcase, froze too, his face draining of color. He looked like a deer caught in headlights, mortified, passive, and utterly trapped. Sienna's voice was a furious, high-pitched shriek, continuing her tirade from the kitchen. "And I don't care if her repairs take 6 months. She needs to stay out of our way. This is our space, not some retirement home storage unit." Kevin finally managed to speak, his voice a panicked whisper. "Sienna, stop, Mom is right here." The silence from the kitchen was immediate and absolute. Then Sienna appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her initial expression was one of pure shock, quickly replaced by a brittle, aggressive defensiveness. She saw me standing there, clutching my small suitcase and the envelope of cash I was about to offer. I did not move. I did not raise my voice. The insult had bypassed my grief and fear, landing directly on the steely core of my lifelong integrity. I looked at Sienna, my gaze holding hers, demanding accountability for her malicious word choice. "Hello, Sienna," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the internal chaos. "I apologize for cluttering your life. I was just about to offer Kevin this." I extended the envelope of cash toward Kevin, forcing him to meet my eyes. Sienna instantly shifted into attack mode, recognizing her exposure. "Oh, now look, Kevin. She's trying to manipulate you with money right at the door. We don't need your money, Patricia. We just need our privacy." Her body language was confrontational, her hands placed aggressively on her hips. "Privacy," I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "Sienna, I heard you clearly. You called me an old leech and complained that I was cluttering your life. Is that how you address the mother of your husband who is temporarily displaced due to a genuine emergency?" Kevin, finally forced to choose a side, stepped forward, his face twisted in misery, attempting to placate everyone. "Mom, Sienna didn't mean it. She's just stressed about the minimalist aesthetic. It was just a figure of speech." He reached for the suitcase, trying to physically move the conflict away from the entrance. "No, Kevin." I stopped him with a firm raised hand. "A leech is a parasite. A leech is a burden. That is precisely how your wife views me. And your immediate defense of her vile language confirms that you tolerate it." My emotions were boiling, but I focused the heat into cold, analytical fury. My decades as an accountant, identifying and isolating financial liabilities, prepared me for this. Sienna's expression was now pure resentment. She realized her mask was irrevocably off, and her plan to passive-aggressively shame me was exposed. "You know what, Patricia? Yes, I do think you're a burden. You demand things, you interfere with Kevin's life, and you haven't helped us financially with this house. You are an unwanted disruption," she hissed, leaning into the confrontation. "Unwanted disruption," I stated, nodding slowly. "Thank you for your honesty, Sienna. I now understand exactly where I stand." The shock was gone, replaced by the profound, chilling realization that this was not a temporary inconvenience for them. It was a hostile environment, and my only option was immediate strategic retreat. I would not allow myself to be treated as a parasitic dependent. The phrase "unwanted disruption" was the definitive turning point, the hammer blow that shattered the last remnants of my maternal hope and social expectation. I was standing on their immaculate threshold, clutching my single suitcase, and I understood with absolute clarity, remaining here even for 3 weeks would be a daily spiritual violation, an act of self-abuse I refused to commit. The insult of leech had done its work. It had forced me to see the hostile truth. I looked from Sienna's venomous face to Kevin's profile, his gaze fixed on the floor, his body language shrinking inward, unable to defend his mother or confront his wife. His passivity was not protection. It was complicity. That was the core trauma, the realization that my son valued his wife's volatile comfort over his mother's basic dignity and safety. My emotions shifted from shock and fury to a cold, hard professional resolve. The accountant within me took over. I needed to minimize the liability and execute an immediate clean withdrawal. "Kevin," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence devoid of the maternal warmth he was accustomed to. "Give me the car keys." He looked up bewildered. "Mom, what, while you just got here?" "Give me the keys," I repeated, extending a steady hand. "I will not spend 1 minute in a home where I'm considered a parasite. The 3-week arrangement is canceled, effective immediately." Sienna, smelling victory, stepped in with a mocking smile. "Fine, just take your stuff and go." "We told you we didn't have space." I ignored her, focusing entirely on Kevin, forcing him to choose. "You heard her, Kevin. You defended her choice of words. You have demonstrated that my vulnerability is an open season for contempt. The only thing I require from you is the keys to drive away from this hostility." The confrontation was the emotional explosion. It wasn't loud. It was the silent implosion of my expectations. Kevin fumbled in his pocket, his hands trembling, and dropped the keys into my palm. He couldn't meet my eyes. He couldn't articulate an apology or a defense. I turned from both of them. My retreat was not a defeat. It was a strategic withdrawal. I knew I had to secure an immediate private alternative. As I walked to the garage, pulling my suitcase, I pulled out my phone. My first call was not to complain, but to secure my safety and my future. I called Mr. Hayes my estate lawyer, whom I rarely bothered. "Mr. Hayes," I stated clearly, my voice sounding professional and efficient. "I need you to contact the construction company immediately. I want the repair schedule accelerated at any cost. And please prepare documents for a complete irrevocable trust restructuring effective immediately. My son Kevin will be receiving a letter detailing the new terms. This needs to be handled with absolute discretion and speed." My action was definitive. The temporary displacement had become the mandatory condition for a permanent financial and emotional separation. The word leech had cost Kevin his future inheritance and my temporary dependence. I was no longer the vulnerable, grieving retiree. I was Patricia the accountant, protecting her assets from a hostile environment. The silence of the garage as I started the car felt like the quiet, empowering calm before a major financial transaction, one that would forever reshape my relationship with my only son. My retreat from their hostile threshold was not an ending, but the launch of my decisive justice building. Driving away from Kevin and Sienna's house, I immediately executed my strategic counterplan, channeling all my hurt and indignation into professional action. I did not waste time on tears or confrontation. My focus was on securing my independence and making the consequences of Sienna's contempt clear. First, the immediate practical fix. I drove straight to a high-end, long-term stay hotel suite. I booked it for a month, paying immediately and in full with my own card. This financial move solidified my complete independence. I was not a burden and never would be. I then called the contractor as planned and authorized a significant bonus to accelerate my home repairs, stating, "I need to be back in my own controlled environment in 2 weeks maximum." This act of using my own money to remove my vulnerability was incredibly empowering. Second, the financial hammer fell. I spent the next morning at Mr. Hayes' office. I instructed him to immediately draft the paperwork for a completely irrevocable trust restructuring. The previous revocable trust had named Kevin as the primary outright beneficiary upon my death. The new structure changed Kevin's status dramatically. He would receive a small annual managed income for life, but only if he maintained gainful employment and was legally separated from Sienna. The principal would now pass to several designated charities and a small fund managed by an external fiduciary for Kevin's children, if they existed, accessible only for education. This cutting of financial access was my most powerful weapon, ensuring Sienna could never profit from her leech comment. My emotions were tightly controlled. I presented the necessary legal facts with the precision of an accountant closing a high-risk account. Third, the evidence and documentation. I wrote a detailed factual log of the incident, noting the precise location, Sienna's exact phrasing, "old leech," Kevin's immediate enabling response, "just a figure of speech," and my swift unilateral departure. This document was notarized and filed with my lawyer, anticipating any future attempt by them to claim I was unstable or acting irrationally. Finally, the non-negotiable boundary was established with Kevin. I instructed Mr. Hayes to send Kevin the new trust documents via certified mail, along with a formal letter stating that our relationship was now permanently governed by legal distance due to his passivity and his wife's hostility. The letter included this cold, hard truth: your silence in the face of contempt was an act of betrayal. You prioritized Sienna's volatility over your mother's dignity. The consequence is the immediate and permanent restructuring of my estate. I refused to take any of Kevin's calls for 2 days, forcing him to absorb the legal reality without any opportunity for his usual pleas and excuses. I felt a grim, resolute satisfaction. They wanted space. I gave them a permanent structural distance, proving I was anything but a burden. I was an independent force with the resources and will to defend myself. The certified letter detailing the irrevocable trust restructure landed like a bomb in Kevin and Sienna's perfectly minimalist home, triggering their desperate counter-strike. This was the moment of extremely intense drama, where they realized the magnitude of their loss and tried to regain control by destroying my credibility. Sienna was predictably the engine of the attack. She launched a campaign across social media and through mutual family friends, painting me as the vindictive, financially abusive mother who had stolen Kevin's inheritance, purely out of spite over a minor dispute. She fabricated a story that I was mentally unstable, claiming I had been showing signs of paranoia and severe financial rigidity since David's death. Her narrative was, Patricia had a nervous breakdown because she lost control of her house and is punishing Kevin for not moving in with her. She attempted to use my age and my recent displacement to suggest I was delusional, trying to direct the audience to hate my legal actions. Kevin, terrified of his diminished financial prospects and facing Sienna's fury, became her weapon. He called me repeatedly, his voice oscillating between genuine panic and calculated aggression. "Mom, you need to stop this. Sienna's lawyer says we can prove you're mentally unfit. You left the house after 3 minutes. That's not rational. Just revert the trust, and we'll apologize for the leech comment. Don't make us force you to see a psychological consultant." His pathetic reliance on threatening my mental stability, directly echoing Sienna's malice, was the ultimate proof of his moral compromise. I remained shielded in my hotel suite, my emotions cold and contained. I instructed my lawyer to send a second letter, simply attaching the notarized log of the incident, including Sienna's exact words. I was not settling, and I was not arguing. Their desperate attack only validated my initial decision. They saw me as an obstacle to be manipulated, not a mother to be respected. My face set in a firm, unyielding expression. They were attempting to leverage my vulnerability as a widow to seize assets, and I was meeting their emotional chaos with the unassailable order of the law. The tension was immense, but I knew my silence and the strict adherence to my legal strategy would ultimately expose their calculated greed. The impending legal confrontation would not be about my stability. It would be about their documented hostility. Kevin and Sienna's attempt to portray me as a mentally unstable, vengeful widow backfired spectacularly, providing me with the perfect opportunity for the final strike. Their aggressive legal challenge against the new, irrevocable trust forced me into a deposition which I orchestrated to be the stage for their absolute humiliation and the validation of my sanity. I entered the deposition room with Mr. Hayes completely composed and dressed with the meticulous order of a woman entirely in control. Sienna sat across the table, her face tight with manufactured outrage, while Kevin looked pale, his body language already defeated. Their lawyer hammered at my mental state, citing my irrational and immediate flight from the marital home as proof of instability. I responded calmly, using my professional training to articulate my defense. My decision was not irrational. I stated, my voice steady. It was a sound fiduciary decision to remove myself from a hostile environment. As an accountant, I identify liabilities and mitigate risk. Remaining in a home where I was publicly designated an old leech by the primary beneficiary's spouse constitutes a significant psychological and financial liability. My immediate departure was the only rational choice. The exposing the betrayer's moment came when Mr. Hayes introduced my notarized log. He had the court reporter read the exact moment of the confrontation, focusing on Sienna's direct quote, "Why is that old leech here? We don't have space," followed by Kevin's enabling response, "She's just stressed. It was just a figure of speech." Sienna tried to interrupt, claiming context, but Mr. Hayes cut her off, his gaze sharp. "Mrs. Sienna, do you deny using the word leech to describe your husband's 70-year-old mother who was temporarily displaced due to structural damage to her home?" Her forced composure cracked. "It was a private argument," she spat, her expression hardening with pure resentment. "It was heard by the victim," Mr. Hayes corrected. He then presented the new trust documents detailing Kevin's minimal managed stipend, contrasting it sharply with the extensive wealth he would have received under the old revocable trust. Mrs. Peterson's subsequent actions, the immediate, definitive, and legally flawless restructuring of her assets to protect them from potential abuse and seizure, are the actions of a highly competent financial planner, not a person suffering from paranoia. Her actions are a direct, rational, and proportionate response to the hostility exhibited by the defendants. Kevin finally spoke, his voice a desperate whine directed at me. "Mom, please don't do this." You know, I didn't agree with her. I looked directly at him, my eyes meeting his for the first time in weeks. "Your passivity was your agreement, Kevin. You prioritized her cruel lie over my basic human dignity. The cost of that choice is now permanently documented." My emotions were cold, resolute, and final. The judge reviewing the testimony and the rational restructuring easily dismissed their petition to challenge the trust based on my alleged instability. The satisfaction of the victory was not in the money I withheld, but in the absolute vindication of my sanity and integrity against their calculated greed. The truth was exposed, showed they were the calculating ones, and I was the methodical defender of my own life. The judge's swift dismissal of Kevin and Sienna's challenge confirmed the absolute legality and rationality of my trust restructuring. I won the legal battle decisively. Walking out of the deposition flanked by Mr. Hayes, I felt a powerful, profound sense of victory. The stinging insult of being called a leech was replaced by the overwhelming satisfaction of knowing I had used my resources and intellect to protect my autonomy. I had successfully defended my 70 years of hard-won independence against the vicious entitlement of my son's wife. But the triumph was immediately weighed down by the deep, hollow sorrow of familial loss. The legal win was complete, but the emotional cost was the permanent severance of the uncomplicated mother-son relationship. The sight of Kevin's defeated face as I delivered the final non-negotiable truth that his passivity was his agreement brought the sharp pain of sadness for having raised a child only to be met with betrayal. The victory secured my assets, but it highlighted the tragic failure of my parenting that had fostered his moral weakness. However, this solitude was also the start of my profound liberation. I realized that for years I had allowed the fear of being a burden to make me overly cautious and accommodating, giving Sienna an opening to exploit. Now released from the need to perform, as the perfect non-intrusive mother, I was free. I regained my life by moving back into my newly repaired home exactly 2 weeks after the incident as planned. The house felt more than just physically safe. It was a sanctuary of emotional independence. My first act of true self-liberation was practical. I dedicated a weekend to going through all my financial files, not out of fear, but out of empowered purpose. I simplified my banking, updated my portfolio, and scheduled quarterly meetings with my trust manager, my hands moved with purpose and clarity, reaffirming my competence. The entire process was a therapeutic confirmation that the mandatory condition for my future peace was absolute, uncompromised self-reliance. I established an unbreachable boundary with Kevin. Our communication became limited to brief, mediated exchanges initiated by me, strictly focused on his children, if he ever has them, or necessary family updates. I made it clear that any mention of the trust or Sienna would result in immediate silence. I was prepared to live with the knowledge that I had chosen my dignity over the pretense of a functional family. My emotions settled into a quiet, resolute determination. I was no longer the vulnerable elderly woman displaced by a crisis. I was Patricia the accountant, who had faced a hostile takeover and won through superior planning and integrity. The entire painful ordeal was the deserved wake-up call that forced me to accept that true familial love cannot be conditional on financial expectation, and my best defense is always my own unyielding strength. The victory was defined not by the money I kept, but by the dignity I reclaimed. The meticulous order I restored in my home could not silence the profound internal conflict that raged within me. I was legally and financially secure, my independence reaffirmed, but the silence of the house felt less like peace and more like an echo chamber for my guilt. The central question that relentlessly assaulted me was, did I react to Sienna's contempt, with excessive punitive force prioritizing my defense of the money over the salvageable remnants of my relationship with Kevin? I often found myself pacing my living room, the space that Sienna deemed too cluttered. My face was etched with the strain of this internal debate, my expression oscillating between the cold pride of my legal victory and a deep, aching maternal sorrow. I had used the irrevocable trust, a tool designed for long-term protection, as an immediate decisive punishment. My mind, the accountant argued, he enabled financial predators. His passivity was a liability that required immediate absolute isolation. But my heart, the mother whispered, I destroyed his future based on an insult spoken in anger. I failed to offer him a path to repentance, instead offering only a permanent financial prison. My internal conflict centered entirely on Kevin's moral weakness. I recognized that his immediate defense of Sienna calling Leach a figure of speech was not malice, but paralyzing fear of conflict. I realized I had judged him not for a crime of action, but for a crime of passivity and character. I knew that by imposing the new trust, I had eliminated the incentive for Sienna to stay with him, which might eventually free him, but I had also eliminated his safety net, guaranteeing him a struggle for the rest of his life. My response, while justified by the threat, felt unbalanced. A surgical strike that amputated the entire limb when a strong splint might have sufficed. I looked at my hands, the hands that signed the irreversible papers. My failure was not in detecting the plot, but in allowing my lifelong fear of vulnerability to dictate my counteraction. I had been so terrified of becoming the dependent leech that I retaliated by becoming the absolute controller, dictating the terms of Kevin's meager financial existence. My action, though, legal lacked the empathy that should accompany justice. I had failed to differentiate between necessary boundary setting and complete cold-hearted withdrawal of opportunity. The painful truth was that I had not only protected my assets, but also permanently affirmed the worst part of Sienna's accusation, that I was obsessed with control. My victory felt hollow because the mandatory condition for my future peace, the belief that I had acted with maternal fairness, was compromised. I had secured my independence, but I was now utterly alone in that security. I understood that to truly move forward, I couldn't just manage my assets. I had to manage my lingering guilt and find a way to reconcile my professional need for absolute security with the profound, complicated love for my deeply flawed, passive son. The emotional cost of my victory was the isolation it enforced, a heavy, self-imposed sentence I now had to learn to live with. The intense reflection following the legal victory finally steered me toward a crucial point of resolution and painful growth. My independence was secured, but I was determined not to let my victory over Sienna become the permanent emotional execution of my son. The ultimate task was redefining my relationship with Kevin, acknowledging his failure without succumbing to perpetual bitterness. The greatest lesson I learned was the difference between protecting assets and protecting dignity. My lifelong pursuit of financial order had successfully shielded my wealth, but my inability to tolerate any perceived dependence, my own or his, led me to react punitively. My growth began with accepting that Kevin's fundamental failure was not malice, but a desperate lifelong passivity I had inadvertently fostered by always being the strong organizing force. I realized my error wasn't creating the irrevocable trust that was necessary, but failing to address the human consequence of that extreme measure. I learned that financial security is worthless if purchased at the price of eternal regret. My first decision to improve the relationship was to open a narrow, structured channel of communication. Several weeks after the judge dismissed their challenge, I sent Kevin a letter via certified mail bypassing lawyers and Sienna completely. The letter was devoid of accusation regarding the leech comment, but was painfully honest about the consequences of his passivity. I explained that the trust was irreversible, but I offered an unconditional commitment. I will pay for 1 year of intensive personal therapy for you, not conditioned on the trust and not conditioned on your marriage. This is not for me. It is for you to learn how to choose courage over fear. The emotional requirement was bridging the chasm with genuine concern for his well-being, separate from any financial incentive. It was a difficult step offering help where I had only delivered judgment. I established new non-negotiable boundaries. We agreed to meet monthly for lunch in a neutral public setting. The rule was rigid. No discussion of the trust principle, no discussion of Sienna, and no discussion of my health. We would focus only on his work, his hobbies, and his future aspirations. This enforced boundary was vital, preventing his default behavior of seeking financial reassurance or using me as a sounding board for marital woes. However, in my resolute determination to maintain my legal and emotional distance, I committed a significant error in decision-making. 6 months after the incident, Kevin finally made a courageous choice. He initiated divorce proceedings against Sienna, a step I had long wished for. The move was financially devastating for him, as he had to sell their home to split the equity. He was left in a small temporary rental apartment, facing immense loneliness. He didn't call me for money. He called me quiet and ashamed, asking if I still had his childhood photo albums and the few boxes of sentimental items he had left in my basement years ago. The planner in me, terrified of violating the new structure and appearing to reward him for leaving Sienna, sent him a formal text message stating, "All your items are safe. I will have Mr. Hayes arrange a contactless drop-off with a third-party moving service next week." My logic was, maintain absolute legal distance. Do not let sentiment open the door to emotional dependence. But the effect of this error in decision-making was that I replaced a simple, deeply meaningful act of maternal comfort with a cold, formal transaction. I sent a stranger to deliver his memories when he simply needed his mother to open the door and hand them to him. I prioritized the structure of my new secure life over the humanity of his devastating transition. My daughter, overhearing this decision, criticized me gently. "Mom, he chose independence. He needs his mother, not her logistics manager." This forced self-reflection was the final stage of my growth. I understood that the mandatory condition for my future peace was integrating compassion into my competence. I had secured my perimeter, but I had nearly starved the single person I loved within it. The next time we met for lunch, I went off script. I did not discuss the trust, but I brought him a small framed photo of him and his father. I placed it on the table and said, "I am proud of your courage, Kevin. Let's talk about the future, not the past." The resolution was not a full reunion, but a firm commitment to a relationship built on adult respect, distance, and the knowledge that I would forever be his mother, even if I was no longer his financial safety net. If there is one absolute definitive lesson I want to share with you, the viewer, especially those of you managing expectations and navigating temporary vulnerability in family dynamics, it is this: your dignity is priceless and must be defended with financial ferocity. My story is a chilling case study in how a temporary crisis home repairs can become the catalyst for a permanent exposure of hostility, underscoring the vital need for legal preparation. First, let's address the cost of dependence and the power of independence. The word leech was the critical insult that exposed their contempt. It was the moment I realized that despite my decades of hard work and self-sufficiency, my temporary vulnerability made me a target. The primary moral truth here is that financial independence is the ultimate shield against disrespect. For the audience, never under any circumstances allow yourself to become entirely dependent on a reluctant relative. Always have an immediate financially secured plan B. My swift retreat to the paid hotel suite, an act of using my own money to remove myself from hostility, was the single most powerful act of liberation. This mandatory condition for peace is non-negotiable. Be self-sufficient until the end. Second, the danger of enabling passivity. Kevin's moral failure was his passivity, his immediate defense of Sienna's contempt to avoid a scene. I learned that ignoring a child's weakness is not loving. It is preparing them for ethical compromise. My use of the irrevocable trust was not just about protecting money. It was about forcing Kevin into a situation where he had to choose courage, separating him from the manipulative influence of a financial incentive. For the audience, if your adult child's passivity allows a spouse to disrespect you, you must use your power to enforce a boundary, even if it means financial constraint. The consequence must fall on the enabler. My growth came from accepting that I had to stop managing his finances and start forcing him to manage his character. Third, the balance of justice and empathy. While my legal response was necessary to establish the boundaries and secure my assets, I made the profound error of allowing the rigidity of my new system to override my humanity during Kevin's divorce. I prioritized legal distance over emotional comfort, turning a simple maternal act handing over photo albums into a cold transaction. My resolution is found in the middle ground. You must fight the legal war with the cold precision of an accountant, but you must rebuild the relationship with the cautious, structured empathy of a mother. The goal is to maintain your stability while offering a defined conditional path for the broken relationship to heal. My story should serve as a stark warning. Your dignity is not worth sacrificing for temporary convenience or the illusion of family harmony. Secure your independence, establish irrevocable consequences for betrayal, and always be prepared to walk away from any environment that dares to call you a leech. Your peace is your most valuable asset. So that is the shocking, painful truth of how the word leech cost my son his inheritance and restored my life. It taught me that my greatest strength wasn't my bank account, but my absolute unyielding will to be an independent woman. I am safe, my home is my sanctuary, and I am focused on my life cautiously and structurally, rebuilding a new, honest relationship with Kevin. I want to know what you think. Given Sienna's horrific insult and Kevin's immediate complicity, did I go too far by immediately restructuring the entire estate into an irrevocable trust? Or was that the only proportionate response to secure my dignity? Have you ever had to choose your independence over family obligations? Your perspective is invaluable to me. Drop your thoughts, comments, and your own experiences in the section below. I am reading and responding, seeking the wisdom of this community. If this story helped you understand the critical need for absolute financial boundaries, or if you appreciate the frank honesty of the mother-in-law perspective, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next video, where I discuss the surprising, quiet decision Kevin made after his divorce that finally proved his redemption. Thank you for sharing in my journey toward honest independence. Until next time, defend your dignity, maintain your independence, and never settle for being a burden.